Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Pull Up A Sandbag with Joe. Hi, my name's Joe O'Connor, founder and CEO of the Transformer Company, and I help veteran business owners and those who support veterans become bigger, better and even bolder versions of themselves. And I do this in three key areas: health, wealth and mindset. Now, for those of you who tuned in before, you know that this podcast is made up of three main sections. First section is where we look at the week that was. That's a review of the previous week's news items. Then we move on to standing on the shoulder of giants. That's where I get to spend some fantastic time speaking with someone who I consider a giant and who I think that we can learn lots from. And then finally, I just touch on some health, wealth and mindset tips. So, to start with, we've got this week that was. So what's happened in the news this week? Well, You'll Never Walk Alone is a great song that brings back many memories of Jerry Marsden and the Pacemakers. And in this particular instance, during the previous week, sadly, Cristiano Ronaldo and his wife lost one of their twin babies. And that, I can only imagine the pain that they went through. And that was over the Easter weekend. And during the Man United and Liverpool game, the spectators all came together, gave a standing ovation, and the Kop fans sang You'll Never Walk Alone. And I think that that's brilliant because the Man United fans joined in too. Now, think about teamwork for a minute. When can you come together with someone who is maybe a rival of yours and yet you have a common aim? So from that gesture of kindness, just think that how we can come together to help each other through tough times. And moving on to something else that I found interesting and also disturbing. Targets will fall when hit was a term I generally and regularly used as a skill at arms instructor and a range master instructor, where I'd take soldiers on the ranges to fire live weapons. And the latest figures in the US, sadly, show that gun crime and gun injuries and fatalities overtook car crashes during 2020 and was the leading cause of death in teenagers for that year. Now, that is quite saddening, really. And these figures were given by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And it shows that over 46,000 young Americans died of firearms related injuries in that year. And one of the other things I found is what goes on in the US usually comes over to the UK. So what can we do? What do you think we can do to stop this both in America and actually coming over to the UK? Because we find that knife and gun crime is on the increase. And targets will fall when hit. It's not like Call of Duty where, you're going down a particular battle group and you're going into a situation. And when you fire at a figure, then the same figure appears later on. When targets fall in real life, they don't get up. So what can we do to prevent that? And the next one, I know that this has been in the news a lot and it seems to be overtaking many things when actually there's lots of other stuff going on in the world. And I thought that shaken but not stirred reminds me of drinks and parties. And a man without shame is how Keir Starmer, the opposition leader, referred to the Prime Minister when he was said to have only taken 9 minutes to pour drinks to his staff. Yet, a man, as Keir Starmer said, couldn't even spend 9 minutes with his dying father. So what needs to happen to make the changes in this, and maybe the PM to realise that his actions for what a good leader is lead by example. And yet we've still to wait to find out exactly what happened, because the facts are still to come out from the Sue Gray report and the police findings. So I'll be keeping a regular look on that to see what happens and be reporting back to you. Back in 1930, going back all those years on an Easter Monday, so 30 years ago, quite recently, in 1930, the BBC reported something. Now, you've heard of the phrase, no news is good news, haven't you? Well, actually, the BBC on Easter Monday in 1930 had no news to report, at least that's what they thought. So they played a piano recital for 15 minutes. Interesting that because there was no bad news, maybe, that there was nothing to report. And I find that goes on regularly in the media and the way that they report things, because, you know, there's lots of stuff that goes on each day, which is really happy. Like, for instance, I went to take my son to play football with his team this morning, and that was more than 30 young lads, 17-year-olds, all playing a game to enjoy, obviously to win. But the fact is that, and the parents were there, so overall there were about 100 people involved in that morning and this morning. And I think that more things like that should be reported. That's why I always love to give you some good news as well as the not so good news. And something else that's been reported recently is about Apple employees in the US, and I dare say it will be in the UK at some stage too, because Apple are taking the first step to form a union, to unionise. Now the thing is that it needs 30% of employees to agree. Now, obviously, the downside is most of Apple's income comes from business services. So why do I say that's a downside? Well, because the retail side doesn't generate as much income. So that's not a big profit maker for Apple. Now, the laudable intended consequences means that if the Apple employees push too hard to unionise and make unrealistic, commercially anyway, unrealistic demands, some of the jobs may go. So it's like you must be careful what you wish for. And I'm not sure. If you know better, you could please send me a message. I think that Apple's terms, at least in the UK and maybe in the US as well, offer employees fairly good terms. What do you think should happen? And how do you think unions should be introduced or reintroduced on a wider basis to employees and the way that employees are treated? And then finally, something that made me wonder quite for the time, actually. On the last 2 years during the pandemic, we've watched an awful lot of TV and listened to various documentaries, and Netflix shares have been hit recently, hit quite hard by over 25%. Does this mean that we are going to be watching less TV in the future? Does it mean that maybe Netflix aren't offering as good a value as they could do because they're not making as many films or documentaries or any interesting programs? You see, and what can also be seen is Disney are now streaming. Apple TV has now created its own empire of TV programs. So now that the summer's here, and now that we're mixing more and coming out of the pandemic, what do you think the future is for TV? What do you think your future is for sitting in front of the TV and watching programmes? So that's it for this week, the week that was. That's my take. And if you would like me to report on anything in particular or elaborate, feel free to contact me. And next, we'll be going on to Standing on the Shoulder of Giants. Stay with me, and we'll be moving there in any second now. Thank you. Take care. Hello, and we've come to the part in the podcast where we stand on the shoulder of giants. And today I do have an absolute giant with me, John Thomson, a retired brigadier in the British Army. And I just took a few notes here. It was interesting career, John, a teacher to soldier, then to a managing director of a successful company now. And what has always amazed me since we met is your passion for helping people succeed. I know that how we met was when the Lord Lieutenant of Cheshire, David Briggs, introduced me to you in your position as Deputy Lord Lieutenant, because when I set up the charity for Transformation for Veterans, he said, this chap may need a bit of a hand from time to time. So we were introduced, and I'm so pleased that we were. And you recognise that training is really important, and most of us, me included, I think pretty much everyone, undervalues or restricts ourselves in what we can actually achieve. So what I'd like us to do today is for people, for you watching, I'm going to direct some questions at you, because I know you've got a mine of useful information, which is absolutely amazing. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, because I've got this question is particularly important to me. What challenge did you face when you transitioned from the military to civilian street? What was particularly difficult?
Well, first of all, I'd already had a stint in Civvy Street as a school teacher. Prior to that, I was a soldier teacher, then back into soldiering again. Understanding people. When you come out of a culture of a very can-do, will-do attitude into one where people seem to spend a lot of time thinking and sucking their teeth about things, I found that very frustrating. They try to introduce people to the move now concept. Because there was just too much time spent on trying to perfect something that didn't need that level of perfection. We just needed to get it done and get it rolling, and we'll refine it as we go along. I think that was the first sign. The second thing, sometimes I felt there was a reluctance to take on board some of the lessons that people learn from outside, brought in. And particularly, I was very fortunate enough to be sent to all the colleges and training schemes and all the rest of it by the Army. So I'd got this theoretical experience and also got the practical application experience, having been to various places throughout the world. But that was very difficult to sell, inverted commas, to Civvy Street, because Civvy Street had a different culture and a different hymn sheet almost sometimes, which I felt was a shame, because we were dropping short.
And from that, what have you recognised from the people, from veterans who were in the military, obviously, the successful ones that have been able to transition successfully, and those that maybe not as easily? What qualities do you recognise that are different?
Absolutely. So those people that are clear-sighted, compelling purpose, to a better term, to use a military term, they're the ones that actually can see through it. We might talk about resilience, stickability, whatever. They know something that works, and they know how to go about doing it. I think the ones who struggle are the ones who see Civvy Street as a different world that they don't necessarily belong in. But they do. And in fact, they have something huge in their capabilities to offer a civilian employer. What they mustn't do is to question that or undermine themselves. And sometimes it just means somebody has to rationalise it with them, go through them. Why don't you think you can do this? But I think the most important factor is a confidence. I bang on a lot about self-esteem and professional self-esteem. if they've got those qualities, then they have this clear-sightedness, this clear and compelling purpose that carries them over the line.
Yeah, because I always found it interesting, and I know you'll fill in the blank with the phrase "civvies them," and exactly, so you know exactly what I was talking about. And when I was in the engineers, there were times where I just thought, well, I'm a civilian in green kit. Especially when I was ready to go, because I think that there's a lot of animosity that is inbred, perhaps. And I always like thinking that I'm a civilian as well as a soldier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the type of army we have, which is not a pressed army, that's most definitely the case. I mean, and if you consider people like myself who spent quite a bit of time in what is now referred to as the Army Reserve, we were once upon referred to as citizen soldiers.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an element of tribalism, where people, in trying to defend their own lines, will pump up their own picture and situation, and that's where you get this civvies aren't very bright or whatever, soldiers aren't very bright. The truth of the matter is they're all human beings who have had slightly different experiences. So, we used to talk to people who are thinking about joining the army. We'd say, don't forget, it's not a job, it's a way of life. Whereas most people in Civvy Street have a job. They work 9 till 5. They work overtime when they're called to. Whereas a soldier, of course, is in barracks. Often doesn't go home. So their experiences are different. And sometimes their notice to move is quite short, which means that they have to be able to apply that skill range very quickly. And have the mindset to be able to do that. That all adds up to something that's of value. Having people with those particular characteristics, those character strengths, I think that's a valuable attribute to have, particularly in a civilian working company.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Now, I know, right, how successful you are, although you wouldn't say it to anyone. What I would like you to do, though, is identify and share one reason, top tip behind your success. How do you think, what's your driver to being successful? People. I mean, throughout the army, no matter what rank you are, you have a responsibility either for yourself or for other people. And to me, I've always been interested in people and what people can achieve. And sometimes they need some support with that. As regards to success, I've always felt very strongly that I've been blessed to have been part of some very good teams, sometimes as big as a brigade, for example. And the one characteristic there is the culture. The culture that you become part of, the culture of can do and will do. Nothing's a problem. It doesn't have to be too pretty. Let's get it done, and we'll refine it as we go along. But this positivity that you're surrounded by, I think you tend to carry that with you. So. And it's something to cherish, has to be said, because there's lots of negativity around today, but there's a lot of positivity as well. It's something to cherish. So in coming into Civvy Street full-time again, to me, the important start state was to create that culture again. And it revolves around creating a culture that recognises people as the centre, works very hard to create the culture that will involve not just self-esteem on behalf of those people, but professional self-esteem. Doing whatever we can to build that professional self-esteem so every day they feel as if they've contributed. And at the same time, work on this whole question of communication. Because one weakness I do pick up is the quality of communication, the narrative, the terminology that people use. It often colours the debate, which takes people, as I say, they picked up the wrong ball and ran in the wrong direction with it. So the whole idea of creating those things, actually in the first instance for people, building the team, building the culture, building the capability, empowering people, which sometimes people, the outsiders might think that there's not much of that in the army, but actually there is. I can't see the forward edge of the battle area from where I'm at, but I have to rely on the people who are on that forward edge to comply with what we're trying to achieve. And of course, they can use their own initiative to seize the moment of what they see in front of them. So all those things come together, creating that culture, creating that person, that side of the person that builds their professional self-esteem. And you can touch it. You can feel it when people are starting to think about what's next.
They want to. They're hungry for development. They're hungry for responsibility, and you can trust them. And that's the final straw in the wind as regards that culture, and that is building the whole question of trust. I'm here to look after you. You're here to look after me.
Yeah.
So yes, you can come and see me and tell me if something's not going quite right. Those things make a difference.
Yeah, and it is good because that's looking at the difference between micromanagement and macromanagement, isn't it? Because to be able to give empowerment to someone, because for instance, I know in contact, it might be, has anyone seen the enemy? And it could be an 18-year-old lad who says, yeah, and he gives the complete grit, where it is, what the problem is, and then everyone can depend on him.
Exactly right. And it comes down to that experience that we all have at some point, where you're a junior officer and the platoon sergeant or the sergeant major says, I remember one really sound quote. It said to me that, just remember, sir, that wisdom is not the monopoly of one person.
That's interesting.
Actually, you're right. And, we're a family of soldiers who've served 4 generations now. It's interesting to see how even the interaction in the family home is somewhat the same culture, the same attitude, the same outlook. My daughter is people say she's just like me. She's got the warm Insta hand. She gets things done. But she's got a personality as well. And that's the other thing, is leadership. When people talk about leadership, I'm really interested in leadership. It's not what people describe it as. Sometimes leaders don't always make the excellent decision. Sometimes they have to make some pretty bad decisions and not even they like. But it's what has to be done. And to me, creating a leadership style which is about investing in people, not just commanding people.
Yeah.
There are circumstances where people expect the fellowship, expect you to behave in a certain way because you're the managing director or the whatever, the commander. They expect you in a certain circumstance to be decisive. It doesn't mean to say you're going to be like that all the time. There are times when I used to refer to as leadership by being seen, what my MA used to refer to as a sit-on-helmet conference, just listening to people. And from that you can bring a rich tapestry of things that will improve the situation. So it's very important.
Very good. And it was if this was planned, because the next question is, how do you deal with failure? Because you touched on failure a second ago. And I mean, it's important, and I love your view on it. I know we were talking before we started, that life isn't about success all the time. Because if you had success all the time, you wouldn't fail. You need failure occasionally.
You do. The issue that I have with failure is that we create a situation where we believe that failure is terminal. You don't make an error, a mistake, because if you do, it's terminal, you're finished. What the direct result of that is that people start coming forward with ideas. They stop trying things. They stop introducing things, and they will only do those things that are safe, which means that your organisation doesn't progress very much. So failure, to me, is a stepping stone to success, as long as you learn from that failure. A young officer would be brought in front of me because he'd done something wrong. The first question I'd ask him is, okay, so if you had the opportunity to do this again, what would you do? And if he could tell me what was written on my pad that I was going to speak to him about, I'd say, that's exactly what's written on here. Now go away and start doing it. And by the way, don't make that mistake again. You should learn from it. So failure is a stepping stone to success. And to some degree, when we're pushing the barriers of performance, people will fail. Because that's what it's about. It's just then the question of recalibrating, find out what caused the failure, put it right, and move on.
Yeah, thank you. And you were talking about what you want to do to improve. And one of the things that we had a very strong belief in and a support network in the military. In civilian street, how important, because you may be listening and really not feeling that you're fitting in as well as you could do. So bringing it back to civilians, we are civilians as well as military or ex-military. How important do you think having a good, strong network, a network of connections that you can depend on is?
It's everything really, because no man is an island, and that great cry. I'm a full-time civilian now. I have a network of ex-veterans or ex-soldiers who are also full-time civilians of varying ranks. But actually I get a great sense of return from talking to them, being with them, a breakfast club here or something. Yes, to some degree you miss it. So when you go back into their company, they've still got lots of ideas, and they're also very honest. I used to say to politicians, if you bruise easily, don't ask these soldiers a question, because they'll give it to you right between the eyes. And it's not meant to be rude, it's meant to be factual and for your benefit. It cuts away all the flowery bits and gets to the core of the message, which is, and communication is another thing I'd bang on about. But I think that the network is important, because there are times when, no matter who you are, you need to ask a question. You need to run something past somebody. And if you have a good network, you have a variation of strengths and so on, so you can select the person that will probably give you the best answer. What I liked about the army was, if you asked somebody a question, they would say, I'm terribly sorry, I said, I don't know, but give me 5 minutes, I'll go and find somebody who does. Yeah. It meant I got the answer within 5 minutes. I didn't have to wait a couple of days, by which time it would have been old information. That network is the very structure that the armed forces work on. I'm guessing the same as the Navy and the Army as well, the Air Force as well. Outside, if you're not careful when you leave the Army, there's a tendency to jettison those networks, because you're part of a new experience now. Yeah. But, I found that being in some business clubs gives me the same professional return. Every day's a school day for me. I do believe that firmly. So you cannot operate in isolation. If you are trying to set a business up, then you need to be open to outside influence and taking advice, not necessarily just taking it, evaluating it and applying it. And if it's good advice, use it. If you don't think it's going to work for you, don't. But you must never stop taking advice.
Yeah, and I mean, that brings us nicely into the next area that I'd like us to cover. And I know you've got bags of this, because what I talk about here is coaching and mentoring, and to pre-frame it so you understand where I'm coming from. For instance, I think that Alex Ferguson was a great coach, right? I think not so much of a mentor though. Now, Kenny Dalglish was a great coach and a good mentor, for the simple reason that he was a brilliant football player, so that he fits into being a mentor. Yeah. And he was a good coach because he could explain the skills, what he was doing as well, whereas Alex Ferguson was an okay footballer, but he was a very good coach. Now, because of your experience, you fit into the coach-mentor, in my opinion, right? And what I'd like you to share is your opinion on how important it is to have a good coach and or mentor to help you get better results.
I mean, from the day, just reflecting a bit for the army for a moment, from the day you join the army, you're surrounded by coaches. That's the first thing. Somebody's going to tell you exactly where you should be and how you should dress and so on and so forth. That's the simple terms of it. But there's the emotional coaching that strengthens you. For example, if you go into Sandhurst, and Sandhurst is designed to be challenging. It's designed to build your character and so on. You come across the great HR reps called the Garrison Sergeant Major or something, and he just happens to say 2-3 words to you, and it just gives you the wind in your sails. Yeah. And you think you've been in the presence of a great man, and he's been a soldier since Adam was a lad, so there's lots of things I can learn from him. In Civvy Street, it's, I think, equally as important. It was the army that taught me I wasn't stupid. The army's a meritocracy. So the army told me, right, sign this form, you're going to Sandhurst. It was the army that told me, you're going to this course, that course, or the other course. And so I think probably about the 1980s that I suddenly realised, having gone through all these leadership courses that they'd sent me on, that I understand all the different styles of leadership that were actually peddled at that time. But I came to the conclusion that my personal style was one of coaching. So before the event is where you invest in people. So sometimes it's straight instruction, showing people how to do something, how to get a better shot with a rifle or whatever. Other times it's more on the emotional side, to give people the wind in their sails and to meet the challenge, to give them the idea they can. Because once you go into an operational theatre, which happened, of course, in 2003 with me, you suddenly realise it's too late then to get your pamphlet out and start teaching lessons. The mark that you've had on people will become obvious. And not forgetting that coaching can be a two-way process.
Yeah.
You can take something from them as well. So I can remember when things were really difficult at one particular time in my career, when a soldier came up to me who was always in trouble, bless him, and he said to me, "Do you know, sir, I think you're the best OC in the battalion." And then just walked off. Well, for a start, he wasn't exactly an authority other than being charged, but just that business, okay, somebody picked up the fact that, this chap just needs a bit of a lift. And I think that's the whole thing about it. It's coaching. For me, a coach is not necessarily versed in your particular area, but has the ability to ask that difficult question that prevents you from turning away from the issue that you should be addressing. Yeah. And it comes down to the whole thing about trust. You've got to trust your coach, you've got to trust your officer, you've got to trust your sergeant. And that makes life a lot easier when you know that somebody is mentioning something to you out of sincerity. It's not meant to destroy you. It's not meant to ridicule you. It's meant to indicate to you maybe where you need to pick up. So to me, the mentoring side of it, I've always loved getting down the lines alongside somebody with a rifle and say, let me tell you how we're going to improve your shooting, because they are simple lessons to learn. To me, it's important to differentiate between coaching and mentoring, so I think you've been very astute at that.
Yeah, thank you.
To me, it's a style of leadership that I would think has the most effect in Civvy Street. I'm aware that, for example, if I'm stood on a building that's on fire, then people expect me to take command and control. Yeah. They haven't got time for me to take in opinions. But at the same time, when we are working in a situation, as we will be doing in the company in the next couple of weeks, where we're looking at what we call our mission pyramid. So we're going to look at our mission and decide whether it's still appropriate. Does everybody recognise it? Does everybody sign up to it? Does it give them a clear and compelling purpose? We're all saying is we're all on the same hymn sheet. That type of coaching, bringing people in, entrusting people, empowering people to say something, once you've completed that cycle, you've got a stronger organisation to go forward with.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense. Yeah, and there is a distinct difference between coaching and mentoring, in my opinion, because it's the calibre of person who's saying they can do it, which brings us to another interesting question about LinkedIn. And by the way, if you're looking for someone who is a great coach or mentor, find out a little bit about the calibre of person that they are. I mean, how important is that? Because you were having a chuckle before about LinkedIn, weren't you? LinkedIn, by the way, is a great platform.
It's a good tool.
We were just talking about the different so-called experts.
Yeah, I think you've got to be very careful that we don't constantly engage with people who have the theory of things without understanding the practical application of it.
Yeah.
So you could go through a coaching intervention and complete it, and it leads nowhere. Because basically what you've dealt with is the theory of coaching. Whereas a good coach, and since I've left the army, I've undertaking 3 coaching qualifications out of sheer interest. It's nothing to do with career, because I don't think I've got a career now. I'm getting to the end of my working life, but out of sheer interest, it's to do with this people and giving back and so on and so forth. But the person, I think I said to you, I've just had an interview this morning with a young man, and the idea of that interview is for me to get to know what that young man was aiming to do, and most importantly, whether I was the one that could help him do it.
Yeah.
And in the past, I've got to a point where I've said, I don't think I'm the chap who can help you. So it's not about winning business, it's about making the match. So a coach needs to be somebody that has a stature, I think, that emanates trust, that allows people to investigate areas and make them sure, you usually say the thing about keeping their feet to the fire, but always within the embodiment of for their benefit. This is not for your ego or your ability to earn money. It's about their ability to bring it to a purposeful closure. And I think, again, that's an astute question, because coaching must never become mechanical. It must always become something that makes a difference.
Thank you. And what is the one tip, the one thing that you would like to leave as a real deep thought for someone who is maybe leaving the military or is already a veteran from the military, that can help them achieve the success that they desire or deserve?
I think very clearly for me, it's don't undermine yourself. Don't undercut the fact that because you've been a soldier, sailor or airman, that has no application to the civic street. It most certainly does. And there's lots of lessons that I've certainly brought out of the military into the day-to-day running of the business. That's the first thing. I'm going to add a couple more if I may, Joe. The second thing is to be aware of your terminology. So what we call army speak, we have to modify that to some degree to help civilians to understand what we're talking about, because it can become very exclusive. That's certainly the case. If you, for example, we talk about mission command in the army and devolved leadership and so on and so forth, well, I've had to take that and translate it in civvy speak. So I use a system now called the Oz principle.
All right, okay.
Which is mission command, but in civilian speak. So that's the second thing, be aware of that. And I think the third thing is be clear. You spend a working career as a serviceman. I'm guaranteeing that every day you learn something. I think if you're coming into the civvy street, don't abandon that. In fact, if you can, develop it. Go and find courses that will fill the gaps, as it were, or will convince you that there isn't a gap, because sometimes you need to do that. But all in all, don't undermine yourself. It's very important that you understand that the skills that you have are transferable.
Which is really great, because that leads into the final question for today, is about how valuable are the skills that we learned in the military, and how transferable are they to civvy street?
Well, I think we've just come through a period that very capably demonstrates that, COVID-19 period. When things start getting tough and impossible, who do they call? They call the military. So if you take simple things such as logistics, that's bread and butter to the army. Right time, right place, right dress, right capabilities, and right narrative. From the point of view of the individual, I think that the key thing for me is this adaptability. We can take somebody out of, Iraq, an environment such as a theatre of war such as Iraq, and then we can put them in the middle of Birmingham giving vaccinations. And they'll do it with the same professionalism, because that's what they're used to. They're used to expecting to be professionally dealt with, and they expect to be able to give a professional service. So, when I look around the COVID-19 period, I think every day I turn the television on, I got a warm sense of pride when I saw people, who 10 years ago probably didn't think that strongly about themselves, but now will have come away with that with an even more enhanced sense of professional self-esteem. And if there's one advert which I think it sums it up at the minute, it's the Royal Navy advert actually, which says born in Grimsby or wherever, but made in the Royal Navy. And I certainly think that although I've been in and out of service, I was made in the army.
In fact, someone said to me, Joe, if we cut you in half, it would say British Army inside, because you can take the man out of the army. You can't take the army out of the man. That's
true, and sometimes that leads to a frustration when you leave the army and you feel that you can't understand why people don't think the same way. Well, they haven't had the opportunity to be able to see the experiences that you've had and experience them for themselves, which then develops them into a certain type of individual, which is, again, I would argue, is a very capable one.
Well, I could continue asking you questions all day, because I'm always fascinated and interested in the answers that you give and your point of view. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, John. So remember, if you have any questions about this, any of the points raised, by all means, drop us a line. I can always pass your details on to John, who I'm sure will be happy to deal with it. So thank you so much and have a brilliant day. Hello, and here we are at the Wealth, Health and Mindset section of the podcast. And I've got a few things that I want to develop from the last session when we talked about an income and expenditure list for wealth. So if we have a look at wealth, right, how did you get on with formulating your income and expenditure list? How long was it? Did your income exceed your expenditure or your expenditure exceed your income? Because I've been in situations where I've had both. And when your income is exceeded by your expenditure, i.e. your outgoings are more than your income, that can be quite stressful. And just conversely, when your income exceeds your expenditure, that's a little bit more comfortable. So if you remember, we looked at on your expenditure list what you could actually do without. And I know that in the current times that it's very difficult and energy costs are taking up a lot of the income that is coming in. And if you're on a limited income, that can be quite stressful because sometimes you're needing to perhaps look at whether you can have the heating on. Fortunately, within the summertime. So what I would like to touch on now is how to set up regular savings plans and the importance of that. Now, I'm not talking about saving £100, £200, £300, £400, £500 a month. What I'm talking about is saving 10% of your income. That can be 10 pence, 20 pence. You know, I remember as a young lad, I always kept. I had a paper round. In fact, I had 3 paper rounds, and I got £1.50 per week. That's going back some time, isn't it? I'm sure they pay more than that now. I know my son gets considerably more for working now than what I did for working a whole week with a paper round. And anyway, I used to get £1.50 per week for my paper round, and times that by 3 because I had 3 paper rounds. So I get £4.50. So I used to save in my little cubby hole 45 pence. Right, and that didn't seem too much, but by the end of the year I had considerably more than that. So, you know, and then I could buy myself a treat, if you like. And one of the treats I used to buy was I'd buy a single. Right, way before your time, probably. A single was like a 7-inch single or a 12-inch single vinyl record where you get a tune. And I remember I saved up one of the first records I bought as a gift for my mum. And that was Johnny Mathis, going back all those years. And it was a Christmas #1. It was When a Child is Born, years ago. So that goes back some time. So, going back to you, what could you save up for? You might even save up some money now while the summer's here, and maybe you don't need as much energy to keep the house warm, gas or electric, and that means that you can save up for when it starts to get cold and dark at night, and then you've got a bit of an emergency fund, because the savings plan, right, can not only be to buy luxuries. It's important to have a savings, an emergency fund. For instance, where I know back in 1992, 93, when interest rates were at 15%, that's not credit card interest rates, by the way, and that's not car loan interest rates. That was my mortgage interest rate. And at that time, I had 5 jobs because things were really tough then. And I've seen other tough times as well. And now I'm not reducing by any means how tough things are for you. All I'm saying is that building an emergency fund is a really good idea. I used to say, for instance, something that I was taught, because my mum always used to have around about 50 pence. It was in the cupboard, one of the wall cupboards in the kitchen, a kitchen wall cupboard. And I said, what have we got that for, Mum? And that was for the electric meter. And I used to have a bit of well, I used to think it was really clever because I could buy electricity. And what happened was I put the 50 pence in the electric, but then it used to come out into the collection pot, and I used to take it out and put it in again because I thought, oh, well, we're getting loads of electricity. I didn't realise, of course, me being a young lad, that when the electricity meter man came, that they would register the actual cost. Right, so when I thought the 50 pence kept buying new electric, it didn't actually. So there's something that I learned when I got a little chat from my dad. Anyway, coming back to what I used to do back in 1992, when interest rates, my mortgage payments took up all of my money, really. I didn't have much for food or gas and electric. But what I used to do is I always kept the price of a loaf of bread and some milk and some provisions in my kitchen wall cupboard. Now, that was just saving up a little bit of money each week to be able to afford that. So, I hope that's helpful for you. And of course, you do not know your own personal financial circumstances, so you might need to take professional advice, whether that be from a professional financial advisor or citizens' advice. That's just a tip for you that I'd like to share, and I hope you find that helpful. So moving on now to health. My health top tip is, if you remember, I was talking about last time, take a walk on the wild side, and what I meant by that was going out and exercise just simply by walking, whether that's, if you live in a city, whether that's going to a park and just walking around a park, or if you live in a suburban surroundings, or in fact you live in a town but the country's not far away, just go and walk in the greenery. And at the present, the countryside is lovely because all the spring is here and the wildlife is out, and it's lovely to hear the dawn chorus. If you go for a walk before you go to work, the chirping of the birds are just amazing. And if you Google, you can go on and listen to different choruses of songbirds, and then you may recognise them when you're walking in the countryside yourselves. So I talked about taking a walk on the wild side. Today I'd like to talk about take up a hobby. Having a hobby is proven to be a brilliant way to exercise the mind and body. Now, I'm not talking about just taking up a hobby to do with the gym. It could be taking up a hobby of crocheting or railways or anything where you could get in a group of people. And you know, there's lots of organisations that meet regularly, and there's no charge, or if there is a charge, it's very little. To be able to mix with a group of people who are like-minded, they share your interests, and it can be a great way to socialise. And socialising, of course, improves your mental well-being and relieves stress. Because when you can share experiences, that's challenges as well as the good stuff, then you can find that other people may have the answer or may have had similar experiences, and they can share with you how they dealt with it. Because having a hobby isn't just about the hobby itself, it's about all of the other stuff that it promotes in your mind. Does that make sense? See, I know during my rehabilitation, when I'd suffered paralysis, working with the occupational therapist, I used to love working with the occupational therapist. And I used to go down to that department and as an outpatient and an inpatient. And there were other people there who were experiencing similar journeys. Their injury may not have been sustained exactly in the same way of mine, you know, being with, in the army for selection with special forces. Not many people have done that, but there had been road traffic incidents or, injuries that have been caused by medical conditions. And what they found was the occupational therapy department is about getting you able to move your limbs again and improve your situation for daily living activities or indeed for your occupation, hence the name occupational therapy. Like the physiotherapy is to get all of your limbs working again. The occupational therapy is to enable you to improve your movement to help you on a daily living activity basis. For instance, proprioception, I used to find that one of the issues was that I couldn't hold things straight. So with the occupational therapy, I was having a clean out in the shed. So why am I talking about this? Well, when I looked in the shed, I saw the workbench that I'd made all those years ago. And I'm really proud of that because that didn't cost all that much money in the materials. It was wood and a few bolts. It did cost me a lot of well-spent time emotionally and my own physical well-being and the work that I put into it. And that I'll always have that memory now whenever I look at that workbench. So that's why I'm saying to you and recommending that you take up a hobby. Does that make sense? What hobby do you like? What sort of things do you like? Do you like outdoor pursuits? Do you like indoor pursuits? Do you like making things? What do you like making? What do you like seeing? Who do you like being with? Where do you want to be? So take up a hobby because that is a brilliant way to improve your health. And finally, mindset. So I mentioned about the workbench that I made. Well, what's stopping you? In fact, what is encouraging you now from what I've already said to design your own workbench? And I'm using that term metaphorically speaking. It could be to crochet a top. It could be to knit a top for someone that you love. What could you do to improve your mindset? What could you make? Who could you be with? Where are your friends? When was the last time that you contacted your best pal? Someone that you've known for ages, but you've not spoken to them for a while, or you've not been out for a while. So when you bring it all together, take a walk on the wild side. Walking could be a hobby. There are lots of, especially in this lovely weather that we're having. And by the way, lovely weather, it only needs to be sunny. It can be cold. Some people prefer walking in the cold. Some people like walking in the evenings. Some people like walking in the mornings. And I like walking any time of the day. So when is the best time for you to walk? And walking doesn't cost much money. Of course, you may need to drive there, or you could cycle. Cycling is another great hobby. So what sort of hobby do you think you could do to improve your health and well-being, your mindset, and to help you feel absolutely brilliant? So that's me. Until next time, that's Joe O'Connor, Pull Up A Sandbag with Joe. I hope you found this very interesting. I have found it interesting sharing my thoughts, dreams, aspirations and goals with you. And until the next time, have a brilliant day. Thank you.